Hear me? I'm going to do my best with perfect timing on Sunday. My voice started to fade a little bit. I'm not the biggest orator as well, so got added challenge. But thank you for the introduction, Chad. Again, my name is Peter Eddges, and I'm a brewer here for UrbanChestnut Brewing Company in St. Louis. And as you said, I am a past beer school graduate myself. I'm just going to give you some of my background really quick. Started out as a home brewer, big craft beer enthusiast. Obviously attended a lot of beer school sessions, learning a lot about the craft, about regional breweries, local breweries. And I decided that I wanted to take it from being a passion to a career. And it was actually at a beer school right before UrbanChestnut was opening. One of our co-founders, David Wolf, was giving just a quick blurb to the class about how the brewery was opening and we should come down in a couple weeks when it was open. And I cornered him and talked his ear off and got his card and sent him my resume and waited a little while. Actually heard back not too long time after talking to him, and got offered a bartending position in the brew pub down at Midtown. And bartended, was happy to do it, learned a lot about the business doing that, and got to know the brewers. Asked them what they needed, poured beer when they needed it, and when they asked somebody to do things they didn't want to do, things that typically go with brewing, which is a lot of cleaning kegs, scrubbing tanks. That sounded great to me. So started there and just worked really hard and moved up to more of a cellarman position where I was kegging beer and things like that and taking care of beer transfers and whatnot. And it came time that we were continuing to expand. We still hadn't opened the second location yet, but we needed another person to do some second shift brewing. And they asked me and I said yes, and here I am today. So if you're passionate about craft beer, all it takes is hard work. I have a question in the front. Not per se. It did come up in my interview when I was trying to kind of grease the wheels with the bartending manager about knowing beer styles and being familiar with the local scene, which helped. So, it really does help if you can demonstrate what you know what you're talking about. It makes a big impact. So. This is correct.
And he worked at the Starbucks on Brentwood. Every day, I used to work mornings, and I needed coffee badly. And the French press sometimes is too complicated for me that early in the morning. So I stopped at Starbucks, and we started talking, and he would like beer, and blah, 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 blah. And I said, you gotta come to beer school, it's awesome, you gotta check it out. He started coming, and I don't know, was that 3 years ago now? Maybe 4?
Probably more like 4.
So anyway, here we are. So if you want a job in the beer industry, if that's what you want to do, it can be done.
Can be done. It's a lot of hard work. A lot of early morning shifts at Starbucks.
Driving right over the brewery and cleaning kegs for 4 to 6 hours. So it's not glamorous, but it's a passion. So, but anyway, big important question: is there anyone here who has never had an UrbanChestnut beer before? It's okay. You won't hurt my feelings. Okay, I didn't think that would be the case. I figured everyone's had at least one or two of our beers. So I wanted to do a quick overview, and I do have notes, so I won't ramble. I'll try not to ramble. But we just celebrated our 4th anniversary just the last week. We opened our doors officially 2011 on January 26th at our original location in Midtown on Washington Ave. And that's where we got it all started. You probably are familiar with the names of our co-founders, Florian Kuplant, our brewmaster, and David Wolf, our other co-founder, who, for lack of a better word, Dave is our ad guru. The two of them pretty much form the core of our business. Florian, with his extensive brewing experience, and David with his amazing advertising experience. Florian comes up with all of our amazing beer ideas, and Dave helps us execute selling them and getting them to market. Real quick, They both are previously from AB and had met each other there, knew each other fairly well, and they never have given me a very specific, detailed story, but basically the idea, Florian says he's always wanted to open a brewery on his own, which I believe, but an idea that came up between the two of them, and the InBev buyout was kind of the nudge that they needed to realize that they wanted to go out and do something on their own. And when that happened, that's what kind of got everything in motion and got UrbanChestnut going. An important aspect of UrbanChestnut is our philosophy, the way we see craft beer. We have sort of our major philosophy we call beer divergency, which helps us kind of categorize the beers that we make and what they mean to us. And you've probably seen, hopefully you've seen a lot of our packaging and advertising that we classify them both in revolution and reverence. Our idea is that in the revolution aspect, we like to think about what craft beer is currently. It's something in America that's changing all the time. People are pushing beer to further limits than it was before, and we like to think of revolution as our contribution to that particular category. It's like, what can we do that's interesting, that's new, and is still an amazing beer for people to drink? And then on the other side, you've got reverence, which obviously, given the background, especially our brewmaster Florian, it's something that's very important. We're talking about paying homage to timeless beer styles from Europe that haven't changed over the years, that what we really are trying to do is, yes, our name is on the bottle, yes, it's on the tap handle, but it's a style that has relatively gone unchanged, and it's our attempt to just present something that's simple, clean, and enjoyable, and is something that you can come back to over and over again. I don't know how close we are to pouring our first beer, but we can, we're coming. I'll go over some news, actually, that some of you may or may not have heard recently. We've just recently expanded our distribution to Chicago, actually this week. So it's kind of exciting for us to expand. We'd recently moved on. We'd sort of kind of moving more west. We'd expanded into Kansas City, and just this week, moving to Chicago. So it's kind of getting our feet wet over there, but we're very excited. Chicago, much like St. Louis, maybe not quite as great, but also has a pretty exciting craft beer scene. So we're really excited to be a part of that and kind of represent St. Louis and Chicago. And then another big piece of news you may have heard recently is we actually decided to buy another brewery. Opening the Grove last year was not enough to take on, so there was actually a small brewery in Germany that was getting ready to shut its doors. It was something that Florian found out about, investigated, and realized that it was an opportunity that we couldn't really pass on. So it was actually previously known as Brauerei Burgerbrau in Wolnsack, Germany, which is roughly in between, it's north of Munich and south of Regensburg, right in the middle of hop country. Wolnsack is actually where the National German Hop Museum is, so it's kind of an important town in terms of German beer culture. But it should be an exciting journey for us. It's a small brew house. It's similar to our Midtown location, doing about 18 to 20 barrel batch sizes, but it's an exciting opportunity for us because we're going to be able to use that as kind of a launch pad to bring our beers here over to Germany, where craft beer is really not as big as it is here. It's really only starting to get bigger. You may have recently seen some of the breweries like Stone just recently announced plans. They're building a brewery in Berlin. So a lot of American craft breweries are kind of looking towards Europe as a market to expand in. And given our roots in Germany, it's a very exciting opportunity for us to be able to kind of cross the culture, across the seas on a regular basis, brew some fun beers, following Reinheitsgebot in Germany, bring them back over here. Kind of some neat opportunities. Let's see. Yes. I sure hope so. Things are still kind of in the planning phase. The tentative plan is that we would start production there in late 2015. So we've got a lot of stuff to get going, but we're hoping that it's going to mean a lot of opportunities for a lot of people to go over, experience the culture, experience brewing over there. So I definitely, I'm going to keep my ears open for any opportunities to go brew over there. It should be fun. I don't know how much you all know about our second location. It is relatively new. Our original location on Manchester is a 20-barrel brew house. We brewed 40-barrel batches, and that was okay for the first couple of years, but we quickly outgrew our capacity there, and that was when we decided to start looking for another location. And over time, we found the location in the Grove, which was previously Renard Paper Plant, and acquired that building. We've put in a 60-barrel Braucon brewing system there, and it's been amazing how much that's opened up for us in terms of the added capacity. We just did about 15,000 barrels there this past year, and are kind of looking to projecting towards about 30,000 barrels this year, give or take, depending on how things kind of ramp up with some of the bigger markets that we've just opened up, like Kansas City and Chicago. But you all are definitely keeping us very busy here in St. Louis, and we're very, very proud of that. It looks like we've got our first beer, so I'll go ahead and start talking about this. This is actually a beer that just recently hit the market, Erlkonig, which is an interesting style. It is a pale wheat doppelbock, which is not something you see very often. Most often with doppelbocks, you attribute them to being somewhat darker in color, and you don't necessarily see the wheat. This has somewhat of a similarity to a Weizenbock. We do use a Weissbier yeast strain, which is somewhat different. When you talk about most bocks, they're going to be fermented with a lager yeast strain. But Weizenbock being a wheat-based beer, whereas in Germany, if you're making wheat beer, you're using that Weissbier yeast strain to get that banana, that clove. It's just something that is pretty common. But yeah, so this is a pretty big beer. This is 8% ABV, 20 IBUs. So not overly hoppy. The only kind of bigger hop note that we do impart to this is we do dry hop it with American Cascade hops. Just kind of that, you get that kind of aroma from the Weissbier yeast. You get that banana, you get that clove, and then you get hit with that kind of juicy, citrusy, dry hop quality from the Cascade. It's kind of an interesting mix that, to be honest, I haven't experienced in very many other beers, but it's definitely a nice combination to kind of. I wouldn't say this is a beer that you would drink a large glass of multiple times. Something that's kind of nice to sit down with a small glass of and kind of ponder and dissect or fuss over, as we've been told is not the thing to do. But the beer's name actually derives from a German poem, Erlkonig, by a very famous German poet. Does anybody know?
I can't remember the name of the poet, but it's about the elf king. He comes and he kills children.
Does anybody remember that? Yes, Goethe. Very good. You get a glass and a sticker and a keychain. But that is also important to know, because we like to pick some of our more Germanic names tend to be somewhat evocative of mystery and kind of spooky. As she was saying, Erlkonig was the elf king, and in Goethe's poem, he basically describes that a father's on horseback taking his child home, and his child keeps pointing out all of these frightening things that he's seen, shadows moving in the trees, fog moving on its own. He keeps trying to point it out to his father, and his father doesn't listen. And by the time they reach home, his father realizes the child is dead. So, yeah. Yes?
For a prize, do you know who wrote the aria?
The aria.
From Schubert.
That's fine. No, there's no more quizzing of me. Not until the end. But anyway, with a lot of Germanic folklore, there's a lot of darker elements, a lot of mysterious elements, and I don't know. Maybe you could think about the beer that way, being somewhat mysterious and deceptive. But otherwise, I think it's just a really nice beer to sit and sip. But this beer was just brewed recently. We just bottled it. It should be available in 4-packs as well as draft. So definitely if it's something that you find enjoyable. It will be available in the St. Louis market. So.
But notably here.
Oh, of course. Definitely. definitely get it here at Cicero's first. I mean, it's just right there. So, but anyway, getting back to our newer brewery, built by Braucon, which is of course German company out of Munich. Amazing brewery. It's really changed things for us. We've been able to keep up with production. When we were just running the Midtown Brewery, we were kind of pulling our hair out, trying to get beer out fast enough. We were brewing and finishing beer and bottling it literally the day that our distributors were coming to pick it up, hoping that they were going to be running a couple hours late, which sometimes did help out. So this definitely has grown a lot faster than we expected, and it's been a very welcome surprise. But at the same time, not to sound too much like a suck up to Florian and Dave, but to me it's not surprising that we've seen as much success as we have. I mean, I just feel like we've brewed a lot of very nice, very approachable, as well as a lot of interesting styles of beer that we've gotten a very warm reception from you all, and it's just very endearing to come in every day and see what we're brewing and see how it's moving, like see the demand is out there, and it's something that we hope to continue to grow. We've luckily with the space we have in the Grove, being an old paper plant, rather a paper company, it's a huge warehouse. I'm sure some of you have driven by and seen it. It almost takes up an entire city block. So we definitely have the room to stock, to expand. We've currently only got 8 fermenters. I say only 8, but 8 120 barrel fermenters and 3 240 barrel bright tanks. And that's keeping us pretty good for now, but I'm already starting to see the days where we're needing to be brewing a little bit more and having to think about more fermenters, more bright tanks. So it's encouraging. And if you haven't come down, I definitely recommend coming down. We have open a self-guided tour with several stops throughout the brewery. When you come in, our brew house is directly behind the bar, so you can see the 4 vessels. If you come in during the day, you can actually see us brewing, which is kind of exciting. It's something you don't see at a lot of other breweries. I've visited a number of breweries that, they'll put in large picture frames for you to be able to see people working, but for some reason the brew house is always obscured. It's always behind some fermenters or behind some grain, and it's kind of where a lot of the action is happening. It's not the whole process, but it's where a lot of the action is happening, and it's really nice to have that kind of out in front for everybody to see. And then you can take a guided hallway down, takes you right into the fermentation hall, where you've got all the fermenters, you've got the bright tanks, the yeast propagators, everything going on. And then just a little bit further past that, goes right into our packaging hall. We have a German-built Leibinger bottling line that can bottle we average about 90 to 95 bottles per minute. So when it's going, it's flying. It's pretty cool. It's also right next to our kegger, so you can really see very easily in a quick 20-30 minute tour, you could see everything we do from beginning to finish. And it's kind of nice to see that process all the way around rather than seeing it in bits and pieces. So, yes?
Use a different yeast than a normal bock, use different malts. What makes a bock a bock?
Well, what typically makes a bock
is one important thing is higher alcohol. Bocks usually range 6% and above. A lot of German beer styles have very subtle delineations, yet they're very important if you ask Germans about them. So with this, since this is loosely based off of a Weizenbock was a wheat beer brewed with Weissbier yeast, but it was to that higher gravity. It wasn't necessarily that sessionable wheat beer that you'd be getting by the steinful when you go down to the beer garden. So as a higher gravity beer, that's what kind of pushes it into the bock territory. You have a lot of different bocks. You have kind of a standard bock, dopple bock. That's really kind of a good guideline is to look at the alcohol content in terms of deriving sort of what category. But it's open to interpretation, especially in craft beer. You look at somebody who makes just like a standard bock beer, you'll often see it'll be darker in color, it'll be a little lower in gravity. But But then, on our end, we've made a few different pale bocks, and it's usually just that higher alcohol content, and maybe a little bit more of a firmer hop bitterness, but not a lot. It kind of pushes it, if you were thinking about kind of the sessionability of a beer, just kind of pushes it a little bit on the higher end to where maybe it's not something you're drinking in excess, something that's a little bit more of like, again, kind of that smaller pour to kind of contemplate. I hope that answers the question. We'll go ahead and move on to our second beer, which looks and smells like Wopltinger, I think. It's kind of exciting to hear that we were going to be pouring this because as our anniversary beer, this is a very special beer for us, a little more limited, not something, we brew this once, we brew it once a year, so it's definitely limited availability, a little bit more difficult to be able to do these sorts of events with, so I was very excited to hear that Cicero's was going to be having it, which I believe it is on tap here. There might be a few other select accounts, but not many. So it's called Wopltinger. So I'll kind of give you kind of an overall encompassing. First of all, Wopltinger is a very interesting creature. It's delving more into Bavarian folklore. Wopltinger has a few different, there's very, very different views of what he looks like, different manifestations. The kind of standard manifestation of Wopltinger is the body of a squirrel, the head of a rabbit, the wings of a pheasant, sometimes the legs of a pheasant, sometimes the legs of a duck, and then it also has antlers of a deer. And the Wopltinger was actually something that the Bavarians liked to tease outsiders about. Basically, if you were down at the pub or at the beer garden drinking and you were having a really good time and getting quite a few beers in you, and then it was time to head home, it's like, well, when you're out heading home, be careful because Wopltinger will get you. People are like, what are you talking about? And then described this creature, and Wopltinger was this mythical beast that lived in the forests and attacked people. So yeah, again, pretty dark folklore, but for the most part, it's kind of a gag. But he's our neat little creature, and another important aspect of it is that if you go to a lot of German bars, German pubs, you may not spot it immediately, but almost all of them, out of homage to the spirit of Wopltinger, they will have a small Wopltinger of their own, a little stuffed deity, somewhere in the bar. There's actually one at Midtown at our bar. I don't know if anyone's ever spotted him, but he's there. If you keep your eye out, hang out, have a few beers, you'll see him. So, taking that folklore to heart for us, we decided to name our anniversary festival in honor of Wopltinger. So every year, we have Wopltinger, which, I don't know if anybody attended this year. We had it just a couple weekends ago. So we decided this is our anniversary festival, and we're going to brew a beer called Wopltinger. And Wopltinger is kind of a fickle creature, so the beer itself has been somewhat changing. What originally started out as kind of an imperial wingnut, or as we described it at one point, wingnut on acid. It was just a bigger version of wingnut, very high alcohol, still had that chestnut quality, kind of maltier quality. Over the years, Wopltinger has changed a little bit. Previous manifestations, he was barrel-aged in red wine barrels and bourbon barrels. And then we also had an unbarrel-aged version of Wopltinger. This year's version was completely barrel-aged. We actually fermented this with 2 different yeast strains. First with a Weissbier yeast strain, and then with a Trappist Belgian yeast strain. Once fermentation was close but not completely done, we actually transferred the beer out of a stainless fermenter into French Burgundy and Spanish sherry barrels, where we let it mature for a few months, let it pick up a lot of those qualities, some of the woody tannins, some of the juicy qualities, and a little bit of that bright acidity that you get with a lot of red wines. So when you first smell the beer, you kind of get kind of some of the maltier aspects. We're talking kind of the nutty Munich malt characteristics, but you also get kind of like that sharp acidity, and that's definitely contributed by the wine barrels. And this beer still surprises me because I believe it was 11.5% alcohol. And for the life of me, I would not have ever guessed that. If I had been blind taste testing this beer, I would have guessed, I don't know, maybe 8 at most. But it's definitely a very smooth, big beer, and I kind of attribute that to the complexity that the yeast adds, as well as that additional maturation period in the barrels. But not a lot of hops in this, just 20 IBUs. And then the important thing that I didn't mention was this year's, we did not add any of the chestnut flour that you would find normally in wingnut, but instead we added orange blossom honey. Just to kind of mix things up. Again, Volpe is a very fickle creature. And this beer is available on draft here. There are limited numbers of bottles out in the market, so this is a good beer to age. If you want to pick this up, it's definitely something I recommend. I know I'm going to have a couple of bottles up at my cellar and open one in a year or two and see how it changes. Any questions? Yes. They were French Burgundy and Spanish sherry barrels. So it was definitely very exciting to, when we were planning this beer, when we said, we're going to, for the first time ever, it's going to be 100% barrel aged. There wasn't going to be any unbarrel aged component. It was all going to go into the barrels, all pick up all of that woody complexity, the characteristics from the wine. So I really think that it's one of our best Wopltingers to date. I'm trying to think if there are any details I missed on Wopltinger. Did anybody attend the festival? I see a few people. It's definitely a good time. It's definitely kind of for us, it's, again, we very much have a big community aspect to our beer. We like to be involved with everyone here, and we've kind of taken the Wopltinger Festival as our chance to get everybody in St. Louis, in the St. Louis area, to come and pour their beer. So it was really nice to just get everybody down to our brewery. We opened up the whole building. Everyone could just kind of wander where they wanted to, see the packaging hall, see the fermentation hall. So if you've never attended one of ours before, I highly recommend it. It's always a good experience, and Wopltinger himself always does make an appearance. This year it was on the back of a pedicab, and one of our Oompa bands actually marched a procession from one end of the brewery to the other end of the building. So I don't know how quite planned that was. It seemed somewhat impromptu, but it's definitely a good time. Yes?
I was wondering about your rice yeast strain. Do you use that same strain in all of your beer? And you put a yeast strain into it?
We have one Weiss beer yeast strain, so.
Anytime you say it has a rice yeast strain,
Right. So anytime if we're talking about like the first fermentation for Wopltinger, if you take some of our other beers, like our flagship Schnickelfritz, Wingnut, they all use the same Weiss beer yeast strain, and it's we put it out there. It's the original Weiss beer yeast strain from Weihenstephan in Germany. It's kind of the standard kind of go-to wheat beer yeast strain.
would you explain to the class, I know there's some fairly newer people that have been coming to class this semester, but how you guys care for that yeast? Like in-house, like what you guys do to make sure that it stays healthy, that it doesn't get contaminated, that if it does, what stories.
Absolutely.
Just that kind of process.
That whole process, it kind of leads into a very important part of brewing is at the very underlying core of it, it's about cleanliness. It's like one of the biggest mistakes you can make in brewing is to not keep your equipment clean. That's what we basically do. We're kind of glorified janitors. And making beer is messy. Yeast is a messy creature. All it does is create, especially with a yeast strain like the Weiss beer yeast strain, creates a lot of vigorous fermentation that goes everywhere. And it makes a mess. So every time you get done fermenting a beer, you're cleaning tanks, you're cleaning hoses, and that comes into the whole aspect that Chad was talking about in terms of caring for your yeast, which if you don't have healthy yeast, you're not going to have good beer. And Weiss beer yeast is actually one that is kind of hard to take care of in the fact that as it grows, as it propagates and reproduces, those characteristics of wheat beer, that banana and that clove, they tend to fluctuate. And so it's actually something that it's difficult, and a lot of, I won't go into too many details, but when you're brewing a lot of beers, it's actually fairly practical to brew one batch of beer, collect the yeast from that brew that's still alive, still fresh, pitch it to another fermenter, and then put fresh wort from the brew house in there and start another fermentation. A lot of ale and lager yeast strains are fairly reliable that way. Not so much with some of these more unique yeast strains like the Weiss beer or a Saison yeast. If we ferment with this too many times, over and over again from batch to batch using the same yeast, that kind of banana clove will kind of shift. You'll start to get a lot more clove and less banana. So it's actually something that we have a whole quality assurance program, and our quality assurance manager, Kurt, he actually, that's a big part of his job is managing the yeast. And so, we have a freezer with all of the yeast that we use. We have multiple samples, and you just take small quantities out at a time and propagate fresh batches. And for something like Schnickelfritz, where we need that consistency over and over again, for every time we brew that beer, we'll propagate fresh yeast. Whereas you take something like our lager Zwickel, it's a lot easier to get quite a few brews out of the same yeast without experiencing any sort of fluctuation in how the beer ends up. Yes?
About how many generations of yeast get out of one thing of the Weiss beer yeast before you have to go get new stuff?
For us, for Schnickelfritz, it's one generation. So we
Batch. And if we're going to brew another batch of Schnickelfritz, it's got to be repropagated again because it won't taste the same. Like I said, that even that next generation, that clove will really start to punch you in the face, and that banana will kind of fall off. So for us, it's like we want Schnickelfritz to taste and feel the same way every time you open a bottle or you get a glass at a bar. So it's a labor of love, but it's something that has to be done every time. If we're talking about another beer that maybe doesn't have that specification, we might, for instance, pull yeast off of Schnickelfritz. I could be wrong, but I think for Erlkonig we did that. We actually, since it was going to be higher gravity, we were going to need more yeast, so we fermented a tank of Schnickelfritz, and then we pulled that second generation into Erlkonig so that we had that higher cell count. But yeah, taking care of your yeast is important. Our QA department every day looks at every single beer that we have in fermenter and bright tank. If it's actively fermenting, they're looking at their pH, they're looking at the cell count, they're looking at the gravity of the beer, just to make sure that things are moving the way they're supposed to. Because yeast is predictable. When you get familiar with it, specific yeast strains, they work a certain way, or they're supposed to work a certain way every time. And so as long as you're paying attention to that, things will always turn out the same. On the note, we should move on, in case I could sit here and ramble about yeast and cleaning all day. Yes?
That is a good question. So Erlkonig,
Since it is somewhat of a classic style that we've put a weird twist on by adding Cascade hops, that does fall into reverence. And then Wopltinger actually still I'm sorry, I don't know why I said reverence. It's revolution. And Wopltinger also falls into revolution as well, just because Volpe is such a damn weird character. But we will now move into the realm of reverence. This should be Harwood Myth that we're trying now. This is our English style porter, which we've brewed several years in a row. We've had in bottles off and on. And this also has kind of been simultaneously released to the market with Erlkonig. So we've got a representation for both revolution and reverence. But yeah, Harwood Myth, again, there's nothing really mystical and strange about this one. It's a very straightforward, very sessionable porter. I'll give you the ABV and IBU really quick. Obviously, ale yeast strain. But yeah, just 28 IBUs and 5.5% ABV. So just want you to get that big roasty chocolate malt character, a little bit of lingering sweetness, but something again that's very easy drinking and something you come back to again and again. Yeah. And that can be, I mean, it can be difficult. I mean, everybody's palate is different. But I kind of like to err to the side of trying a drier beer as opposed to a sweeter beer, just because, again, you know, if you're sitting down to have a few beers, they're only 5.5%. You really want something that isn't going to become too cloying too fast. But again, I'll go into the name of this one. Harwood Myth is actually kind of harkens back to the history of porter. There was this idea that a gentleman by the name of Ralph Harwood was a brewer, that he came up with an idea of brewing a beer that had all of the qualities that we kind of attribute to porter beer that was, until recently of that time, was unobtainable. In the English pubs at that time, they were actually pouring a beer that required mixing 3 different beers that they called 3 threads to get that same level of chocolatey maltiness and complexity. And I forget who it was. I think his name was John Feltham, was an English writer who it first cropped up with. He was like, oh yeah, you know, the first person to do this was Ralph Harwood. So for a long time, it was held that Harwood was the first brewer in England to be able to do this, and porter was becoming a very popular style. You know, obviously the name comes from the fact that it was very very popular among the porters who were the working class carrying luggage. But then after more scholarly research, they found out that no, there was no way that this guy Ralph Harwood had come up with this, that it was a complete hoax. And we just saw this as a great opportunity to kind of, again, being a reverence beer, to kind of make that reference to the history of this beer. So that's where Harwood Myth comes from. So it's another fun fact for the day. Any more questions about the porter? Yes. ABV was 5.5%, and IBUs are 28. So just enough bitterness to kind of smooth things out, but nothing to hit you over the head with. I guess now we can move on to the next beer, which is another recent release of ours, Cowtao, which is a milk stout, which is obviously kind of a cheeky reference to the idea of Cowtao was a sort of the ultimate symbol of reverence in China, was to actually kneel and touch your head to the floor to show reverence to whoever you were happy to kneel to. So again, reverence series fits in perfectly for us. You get the cow pun, it's all there. But yeah, we've done a few stouts before. We've done a dry Irish stout before, but we wanted to do something else because this is served on nitro. We wanted to do something else fun for nitro that wasn't just a standard stout. This idea came about. It's like, we've never done a milk stout before, and they're pretty popular, especially on nitro now. There's a big company out there that has a lot of success with it. But again, this one is I kind of paired this one after the Harwood Myth, because it really they go together well. You're getting a little bit more of a malty, dry bite on this one, but it still gets balanced out by the milk sugar that we add in the brewing process, hence milk stout. This batch I think had 110 pounds of lactose in it, so it was enough to, without it, you kind of would get, given the amount of chocolate malt in this, you'd kind of get even more of a dry huskiness. It would be a little bit unappetizing, whereas by adding that lactose in, you get some smoother body, kind of a creaminess that, again, going back to this one, we're not talking about anything big. 37 IBUs, 4.6%. So very easy drinking beer. We've also played around with this one too. We collaborated with Colley's Coffee. We did some cold brew espresso, and then we blended a small portion of that into a portion of Cowtao. So you can actually find from time to time some of the special accounts, and then from time to time we'll put it on for a special event at the brewery, the coffee Cowtao, which is a very nice complement to the roastiness and the kind of that smooth creaminess from the milk sugar in the beer. Any questions about Cowtao? Yeah, should have given you a disclaimer. There is lactose in this beer. So, yes.
No, I'm not like this intolerant. But did you say that this particular version, this Cowtao, does have sugar?
This one does not.
Oh,
So,
We're not a special account.
yes, they are. They're very special accounts. I'm sure you could get one if you wanted it. But no, we did a large brew of just regular Cowtao, the milk stout, and we pulled off a small portion. I think it was pretty small. I think it was about 5 barrels, and then we added the cold brew coffee to that, and then we actually nitrogenated the large version of Cowtao, so it served on nitro, and then the smaller batch of coffee we just carbonated traditionally. So we were kind of worried that some of the more delicate aromatics of the coffee might get lost, because the thing is with nitrogen, it's such a softer gas. The way you get that kind of creamier head, it's a little bit lower on the gassiness that a traditionally carbonated beer would be. So you do lose a touch of aroma. It's kind of it's a compromise. You lose a little bit of aroma, but you get that very smooth mouthfeel, making it pretty easy drinking. But we wanted to kind of handle the coffee a little more delicately and allow it to kind of really kind of pop with the carbonation.